Welcome to the Resonature Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Denton, and I'm here today with Aron McNicholas. And when I first heard Aron speak, actually, it turned out that we met at my shop a couple years ago, and we'll get into that too. But I heard you speak recently on our mutual friend Mason Hutchison's podcast, Herb Rally, which I highly recommend people go check out that interview when you get done listening to this one. And when I heard you speak on there, you were speaking on the topic of terrain, which was awesome for the Herb Rally podcast because you were introducing this topic of terrain and the fallacies of germ model. But really, the way that you were speaking was the first time I've heard an introduction of terrain that had no signal in the noise. There's no noise in the signal, I should say. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when people are talking about a topic that is the terrain, which is sometimes viewed as like an antipode to the germ model, there's a charge between these. And it can come up as kind of like a controversial topic. Sometimes people feel like they need to assert against a paradigm that has a lot of presence, or maybe even feel like they need to change people's minds. Maybe they feel like there's an injustice. Maybe they just have been hurt by being in this mix-up between this charge, between these polarities, which is actually kind of a false dichotomy, really. But when you were speaking about it, it was completely neutral. There was none of that charge. And I could feel that from your voice. I could feel that from your presence. And I realized that that's because it's the way that you live. It's the way that you have the philosophy that you set up for your practice in your life and your healing practice. And it was just so impressive to me. And so I found out, wow, Aron's from Indianapolis. That's my old stomping grounds. I just got to get in touch with him right away. I wrote to you later that day and said, man, I'd love to be your friend.
Same.
and so here we are. We planned a discussion to talk about some things that the terrain, but also your work with what you're doing down in Indianapolis as a functional health practitioner. We could get into some of your hobbies as well, or maybe just the things that complement the lifestyle of a healthy, balanced terrain. And before we get into setting the foundation of that conversation, welcome. And Aron, would you mind just introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about your path. Tell us a little about your mentorship, what brings you to where you are, and connecting all these dots together.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, thanks so much for having me on the show. And I agree. I mean, it was really great hearing from you. And yeah, we did meet years ago at your herb store, and it was fun meeting you then. I'm glad that you reached out because, yeah, I think we ran in some similar circles and have some shared viewpoints. So I'm looking forward to having that chat with you today. And yeah, when we get into this topic of terrain, like we were going to, I think so many people, especially if you were into more of these tinfoil hat conspiracy theory kind of things, you kind of feel attacked, right? Because I think when people attach emotion to how they see the world or these paradigms, if we question things, sometimes we question their identity, and it can get quite heated. And I think we can have these conversations, hopefully in a rational, calm sense, so that, yeah, maybe we can have some shared viewpoints. But again, like, when I'm a practitioner working with someone, I'm not in charge of their health. And I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of people because they want the one size fits all, or the practitioner or the product that's going to fix them. But in reality, I'm just a guy that has ideas, and you're there as a support to them. So in my practice, so I am a functional medicine practitioner and an herbalist. And I started out as an herbalist, doing some training here in Indianapolis with a woman named Constance Ferry, who runs a great apprenticeship program. That was kind of my first introduction to plants coming out of an undergraduate degree. And it was really a reprieve to me to be outside and amongst nature. And it was just something nice after being in school for so long to not have to be in a structured, rigid environment the whole time. And I continued my education with Seven Song out in Ithaca, New York. And similarly, it kind of inspired this passion for holistic health because I'd wanted to be a doctor in a sense, but it kind of combated the way I was raised with a more crunchy and holistic upbringing. And so when I was with Seven Song, I saw this really cool guy who was out foraging plants and had a great skill with botany and plant ID. And he was taking it into a more clinical setting with the Ithaca Free Clinic that they have out there. And it really inspired me that maybe there is a way to help people and support their health with, plants. And so I started off as an herbalist, made herbal tinctures and tea blends and consulted with folks, but then quickly realized that people are pretty complex, right? And they're on drugs and other supplements and they have this unique background. And I just felt like I needed a little bit more tools under my belt. So I went to the University of Western States and completed a functional medicine program there. And that kind of allowed me, I guess, a little bit more at the time an understanding of physiology. And it also let me know how to maybe compound some supplements and other nutraceuticals for them. But then I went on to study with people such as Phoenix Aurelius, who was really influential with spagyrics and understanding how to make spagyrics and this whole side of alchemy. I've had other great mentors and influencers like Dr. Tom Cowan. I've talked about this before. He's a great inspiration to me. Dr. Kenneth Profrock also. The Physicians Association for Anthroposophical Medicine was really cool and interesting to be a part of, and seeing how the naturopaths use some of Steiner's philosophy of how they support people's health. So I've been very blessed to be around some interesting folks and get some ideas about, what can we do with these complex, unique individuals that have come before us that might have symptoms.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, you just name drop some legends there. Phoenix Aurelius. So Phoenix has, I saw he's set up himself over in West Virginia now.
Yeah.
And he's hosting retreats or, weekends and things like that where people can come and learn how to do the art of spagyria. Is that something that you took part in, something like that?
Yeah, I did his kind of like introduction to spagyrics. It was like a 4-day course, I believe. And then there was an elevated essentials, which is kind of on top of that. How can we get into different items of, he calls it the items of pharmacopoeia. And so that was really great. And then sometimes this is a really hard realm to grasp the first time around. I needed kind of a second introduction. So I went there and did a private immersion in West Virginia with him. And that was really helpful to kind of get some questions answered and kind of get over that. I think when people start making spagyrics, and I'm by no means an expert at this yet, I'm very much dipping my toes in this realm. There's, I think, a lot of people that get started and it's kind of like interesting, but what do you do with it, right? A lot of these things, you got to repetitively do these things over and over and over again to get a grasp. And so I kind of had stopped for a little bit, and doing that a weekend immersion with him was a great way to get back into that realm and get a little bit more confidence.
Nice. And you mentioned Dr. Profrock. Both Phoenix and Dr. Profrock I met 2 years ago at the Good Medicine Confluence.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's get into the train first.
Okay.
I want to, would you mind, my audience is familiar with this. This is if I'm talking about anything that I teach, I come from the perspective of the terrain. But there's some people who are still kind of on the fence of germ, terrain, and not to set it up against anything, but would you mind just defining what is the terrain model and according to you?
Yeah. To me, terrain is looking at what are the many different influential factors rather than just things in isolation, right? So it's a more holistic viewpoint of, why might we get sick, for example? And that's usually how terrain's applied in the context of immunity. So we had this paradigm presented to us by largely Pasteur, but there was many before him, that the idea that there's one microbe to one illness, and that if we could somehow combat this one microbe, then we could theoretically, stop illness. Turns out that bacteria and supposedly viruses, they're a lot more complex. Starting with bacteria, I think I said this on Herb Rally, if you and I rubbed elbows, it'd be like we could transfer everything that we've lived to each other in that shared knowledge.
But that was the way that we're supposed to give each other high fives during the pandemic.
That's right. If only that had worked to share knowledge. But That's the idea. That's these bacteria are pretty sentient, right? They're pretty smart. So the idea that we could just give, medications to suppress these sentient organisms is, I think, a little egotistical of us. But then if you dig a little deeper, you can find out that, the whole idea that viruses exist are based on studies that really don't follow the scientific method. So in a nutshell, I guess, germ theory was proposed by people like Louis Pasteur. Um, and then the terrain theory is more proposed by people like Antoine Béchamp, later Enderlein, Naissance, Wilhelm Reich. A lot of these are different individuals that found that there might be pleomorphism, the idea that what we label as bacteria or different microorganisms really change form, and they can go into different forms based on the needs of the terrain. And that the terrain is kind of this living environment that responds to things like stress or diet, what's going on astrologically, many different factors, right? And so, again, it makes it difficult, I think, as a practitioner, because you have to take those factors into account. But I think if you think about it rationally, it makes much more sense than that there's one microbe causing all of your issues.
In a way, there's a seed of truth in that from the terrain perspective, because the word germ itself means seed, right? It means seed of
Yeah.
life. And so you're mentioning this pleomorphic cycle, which is kind of like a wheel. And on the top of the wheel, you have this just sparkling little seed of life that can change into forms, and it could change into a bacteria could change into another shape of a bacteria. And many researchers have seen this based on changing the environment. Basically, they're changing the frequency, they're changing the environment, and it makes a bacteria change its shape, or it changes its function, and it responds in a different way, just like you would respond in a different way in a conversation with a podcast than you would if, like, your toaster was on fire.
Yeah.
and so on and so on. And so the word germ itself kind of shows that maybe there is also one microbe for the disease. It's not necessarily it's more of the frequency and the external terrain that is creating the environment from which it comes from.
Yeah, if individuals aren't familiar with Enderlein cyclogeny, I definitely recommend that they look up that chart. It's amazing to see that he kind of spent a lot of time as someone who is a zoologist looking at the character and the types of different microbes that would pop up in accordance to, what happens if the pH is a little off, or what happens with these other factors. And his cyclogeny helps us understand, when are more people in more of a deposition or pathological state based on all these different little guys that pop up in the live blood, for example. And so even if you read people like Walter Russell, right, everything's cyclical in nature. There's always a fulcrum that things branch off into when we have motion, but then there's always a return to rest, that fulcrum point. And so, that psychology, that circle, I think, is a good representation.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious now, because the primary and dominant paradigm that we see here that governs, the way that people buy, and the commerce, and the way that people even make appointments to come to see us, is from that germ perspective, and even within the terrain model, sometimes, if someone's living in it, there still can be the whispers of, is this a germ? And I'll give you an example. So the previous week, my family has all been sick. Started with my oldest son. So I want to say that the underlying kind of like element to it all was the element of water. And so from maybe a germ perspective, somebody would say, like, it hit us, it got us in all these different ways. For my oldest son, from the germ perspective, it got him, by throwing up. And then a couple days later, I had a fever, other fluid involvement, my wife, my other son. And all throughout this time, I'm just thinking to myself, all our waters of our family are actually just recalibrating. Here we are, at this midpoint of the wheel. I'm going to cycle the wheel here again. We just passed Groundhog's Day, and in between the solstice and the equinox, we're at a real tough point
Mm-hmm.
of the year. Things are turning, and all of our biology seems to be guided as like a family unit to say, look, it's time for us to recalibrate. What does the water element represent? It represents emotions. It represents our connectivity. It represents how we flow and our creativity, and all of these types of things. And here we are, all recalibrating our water. So by the end of it, it's like we just got taken out of the dishwasher. All of us were different dishes with different things on them, and now we're able to be stacked up nice and pretty again. And it feels so good. It feels so good. And so coming from a place of this mindset as a practitioner or as a patient, in my case, I'm excited about my fever. And so when people tell me that, and by the way, we're in the month of February right now, the word February is cognate to fever. This is the month of the rains. It's the month of purifying the waters. And the Aquarius of the tropical tradition is the water bearer from heaven, the etheric waters, which I'm kind of talking about here, this element. And so I guess the point I'm getting to is communicating that to my patients or to myself as a patient in these moments when I do feel like it's easy to slip into a victim consciousness of it got me. How dare you go and play with other people that get sick and bring this back to me? And as a parent, I mean, like not putting that onto my child or not bringing that, into the generation, I feel like is an extremely healing concept for me. But how do you maintain the terrain in this paradigm, especially when it comes to your work and your clinic and your patients, and just going about the narrative of that?
Well, narratives are a strong thing, right? Beliefs are a really strong thing, and they can be sometimes really hard to break. And I like that you brought up February and the meaning of that. Our words have a lot of power. So I think a large part of it is the words that we choose. That's a big part of working with patients, is helping them understand how they're interpreting, vocalizing the world and seeing the world. And it's not that we have a better understanding, but I think, like what you were saying with this time and the fever, we used to have weather doctors, right? And they kind of had the germ theory on its back leg. Unfortunately, Pasteur kind of threw it a lifeline. But all these weather doctors kind of showed that illnesses kind of correlated with seasonal factors, a large part of them. So yeah, I mean, who knows why you guys got sick? It could be lots of different things. I tend to say it's, maybe a nutritional deficiency, maybe a toxin, maybe, like you said, it's an influence from astrology. Maybe it's our system needed a little bit of an upgrade or a boost. Steiner himself supposedly said, what he thought were viruses were more messengers from nature that we needed to kind of go through a upgrade based on what was coming in the environment. So, I just present, I think a lot of times patients or those that are interested with books. So they might start with Can You Catch a Cold by Daniel Roidas. Maybe they'll read some of those papers in there and see that this whole idea that just because you're around sick people, I mean, you don't have to get sick. And they've shown with many different studies that, in fact, if you give people nasal secretions and cough in their face and rub all your germs on them, I mean, I think also people can think about it rationally that you've been around lots of sick people and not gotten sick. So we can kind of break that spell and that disillusionment. And so I think it's just educating yourself. And I also oftentimes tell people to just be open. I mean, just being hard set and firm in our ways can be, I think, sometimes a real detriment. I mean, when I work with someone, I ask myself, do I even have a right to be working with this person? I could be doing them a lot of disservice. So, yeah, I think I just present information. If they take it, great. If they don't, that's fine as well. And you just work with people where they're at.
That's what you said about, do I have a right to work with this person? That really struck me, because I'm the type of person that, and I don't know, I get the feeling that you are too. That's really spiritual, and I get really practical about my spirituality. One of the things I pray for privately is for the people that need to work with me to find me,
Mhm.
and for me as a healer to heal myself so that I may be as a neutral witness for their. And I really don't like the word healer,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
because it really does set up this dynamic of power structures.
Yeah.
And when you say I wonder if I have the right, um, that is an introspection of that egoic principle of I'm going to fix you. Here's what's wrong. I see it. I know it. And that is from that's actually what is kind of like the guiding force of this dominant paradigm of germ theory. I'm the doctor. I know best. Here's the results. X equals Y, and so on. And so for my part, when it comes to like our family being sick, there wasn't really a question that came to me of why. I
Mhm.
mean, it would sneak in once in a while. Oh, did we? Was it the chicken? Was it the blah blah blah? But if we just if we let go of it and say, it is for the glory of God to conceal something,
Yeah.
glory of kings to seek it out. But I also am completely comfortable feeling guided that the right thing is happening for me. We need to have a change or a shift for something that is going to, like you said, like in Steiner's example of 3 months from now, we need to be a more coherent family or something for some reason. Um,
Well, I think what you're bringing up is like, to me, what faith is, right? Like, so for example, if we want to bring it back to astrology, I'm a Gemini. And so I like to bounce around to lots of different things, get started in projects that I have no right starting. And sometimes it can get me into trouble. But I like to, in my past, and I still get into this habit, white knuckle things like, oh, it's going to be right now. And we're going to get forceful and, you know, force my way of what I think is right in the moment into reality. But the more I've matured and worked on that part of me, the more I've kind of let go. And when I pray, and it sounds like we have a similar approach, when I pray, a lot of times is like, I'll say, Creator, I have this thing that I'm moving towards, and I know that you will reveal it when the time is right, rather than saying, I know it has to be right now, because in the grand scheme of things, we're just out here trying our best, right?
mm,
And that's back to us as a practitioner, right? I don't know all the answers. And I try to, when people come in to see me, I think one of the greatest disservices we call our doctors because we have this white coat syndrome and this idea that they're superior to us. When in fact, if you see your plumber, your electrician, or your accountant, you don't have that same level of, fear and respect and awe sometimes. And so I think a large part of it is just getting on the same level and being okay that the fact that we're equals and we're having a conversation. I don't have to be the superior force to someone when I'm in that more clinical setting.
um, are you familiar with the herbalist John Slattery?
For that name, but no, I don't know too much.
I think you'd really enjoy his work. He's an herbalist out in the desert of Arizona, and he talks
Mhm.
a lot about terrain. And he's an Irish guy. You could probably get from his name.
Yeah.
And he mentioned this. There's this beautiful thing that he talks about that in this lesson is just brilliant. He talks about terrain, breaking it down from the Irish word, and the Irish. The word terrain comes from the Latin terra, so earth, but prior to the Latin, it comes from the Irish tir. So tir raon, and tir meaning the earth or the land, and the raon is the word path. So it's the path of the earth. But raon, which is can be broken down into two other words. So there's ra, which is the orb of the sun, and the light of the sun that moves through the sky. And on is another word for the sun, but it's more of, here in, he talks about this in English, we have like the word sun or solar, but in some of these ancient cultures, um, dozens of words to describe the phenomena of what it is. And so on being another solar word that is talking more about the energetic quality of the light. So
Mm,
the word terrain can be broken down as the meaning of the land or the path that we're walking on in the land from the light of our sun, or as
Yeah.
the sun moves through us, and
Yeah.
how unique that is because of the personal relationship that each one of us has to the sun and its perspective wherever we are. We have what's called a natal chart that has to do with where the sun is and the moment
Mhm.
that we appeared in this vibration that we appeared, and that there's nobody else, not a doctor, not an ancestor, not a child, has ever walked in the steps that we walk in. And so when we think about the word terrain in its etymological sense, and we've talked about germ in its etymological sense and how it relates to seed, we could see that the meaning of the terrain is actually incredibly personal. It's a spiritual path, and for practitioners to really ask themselves if they have the right to work with them is as somebody who is not assuming those steps for the person, but is witnessing and walking along the side of that person for that brief moment in their life. I wonder
Yeah.
what you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think about, I remember I had a patient and I work with a lot of folks that have cancer, but lots of other things, like autoimmune or GI issues or more chronic ailments. And this happened to be a cancer patient. And I remember they were kind of more in what we'd call end stage care, meaning that things were looking like they were going to kind of, I mean, I think about it as the fulcrum again, right? We have motion and matter that originate from kind of stillness, and that we return back to that when our bodies cease to be here. So they're returning back to that stillness again, which we would call death. Um, and so they were waiting on a family member to come into town, and they were kind of in that delirious state. This is at a point where they were using some pretty heavy medications to suppress pain. And in this delirium, the patient said, um, I just found out they rescheduled it to Monday. And to the daughter at this point, this didn't really make too much sense. And turns out that a family member wasn't going to be able to be there in time until Monday. And that family member got to the place on Monday. And then shortly thereafter, this patient was able to pass away. And I think about that, right? That if you're the provider or the supportive role of the herbalist or however you're interacting with that patient, if you force your will onto them, like if I tried to say, oh, no, it's not going to happen. I'm going to give you all these things and we're going to change this path. I wouldn't have had that experience with that family member, right? And even that, like she had this vision from creator or God, whatever you want to call it, that it got rescheduled to Monday. And that's a pretty powerful thing, right?
Mhm.
And that's not something that I'm in control of and no practitioner is. And that's always a good reminder of, I think, putting practitioners, not that they need to be put in their place, but you just realize what your role is, right? And I think when we try to attach our ego or our aggrandizement to, I'm going to save someone and I'm going to be their savior, we don't have a right to work with them anymore. But I do like you even brought up, the unique astrological chart that someone has. And we'll probably maybe go in here into genetics here in a little bit. But to me,
Mhm.
the reason that a person acts similar to their parents, and sometimes that's for the better or for the worse, it's probably more based on their astrological chart, what the energy was at the time of conception. The endobiont, I think, is a good theory also to maybe why the person is the way they are based on Enderline's work.
Can you
Um,
explain that a little bit?
the endobiont, yeah.
Mm.
So Enderline had this theory that we all have an endobiont, which they call a parasite, which I don't really like that word. Again, words can be triggering, and parasites have a negative connotation.
Mhm.
Where some
Actually,
parasites are good.
parasite actually comes from a previous word for priest.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I like that you know all these root words. But so there's like this idea that parasites are bad, and maybe they're actually supposed to be priestly within us. Who knows? But the endobiont is what helped us to kind of grow our skin, our skeletal system, all these different factors that we need to be alive, right? And that it's working with it to evolve. Um, so your endobion's transferred from generation to generation, supposedly, and it's in warm-blooded mammals. So if you eat a mammal, for example, you actually do take on that endobion. So it's important to keep that endobion in check. If it's allowed to grow out of control, we'll see that cyclogeny take over in certain proclivities based on which endobiont we're talking about. But yeah, it's an idea, it's a theory about why we are the way we are based on something that's maybe not oppositional, but different than our genetic theory currently.
Yeah, great. I would love to get into genetics because in the genetics is a field that is kind of driving the narrative for a lot of the germ models. And so
Yeah.
once we keep going down and questioning in the germ and finding, is there evidence that anyone's ever been sick? Is there ever any scientific evidence using the scientific method of a virus? What it all comes down to at the very bottom is this field of genetics. And it can be so confusing to some people. I would say that they just say, oh, well, they have it all figured out. The geneticists, they're the smart ones. And so, yeah, I'm interested in, because of the terrain, also what, like you said, your mentor, Tom Cowan, calls the new biology, what he also calls sometimes the old biology. And so what we're looking at here is traditional assessments when it all comes down to looking through the science, looking through the trademark science, falsifying it and getting back to, oh, wow, looks like all of these traditions that have passed down throughout the times of antiquity and previous times actually had it right with a qualitative sense. So do you have a critique on the genetic modeling, or I know that you just presented, some other ways to look at it, and I think that's brilliant too.
Yeah. Let's go into like maybe how DNA and genes were kind of discovered. And this largely, I learned this from Tom Cowan. And I think it's important that people go read the original research and all these publications, because I remember being in functional medicine school and reading papers, and man, it was hard getting through school because you read these papers, and you're like, this doesn't follow the scientific method. And you wonder, I mean, I get rid of junk information out of my head every day, and you got to be willing to unlearn. But the idea that, DNA and genes and all these other factors that are the kind of the spark of life came about in the later half of the 1800s. We had scientists that isolated white blood cells and extracted the nuclei from them. They used lots of chemicals and centrifuging and processing to isolate what they thought was DNA. It turns out that they used very harsh acids in this extraction. And basically what they had used was, basically when they isolated these proteins, they were using chemicals that were rich in sulfur. Basically, the scientist thought that because he found something that was rich in phosphorus, that he had discovered something new. Well, it turns out that the previous extractions had used sulfuric acid, while this researcher scientist had used phosphoric acid. So right there, we have a conflict in that scientific approach, right? There's a variable there that needs to be accounted for. And then if you go more into it, later on, with Rosalind Franklin, they used lots of X-rays and other processing techniques that probably influenced what they discovered in the images that they got. So this whole idea that we have this helix-shaped factor that influences who we are is largely, again, similar to virology, based on experiments that have variables that aren't accounted for. So when we think about why do we actually have the proclivities that we have, again, I think more in the sense that families have similar patterns. They tend to eat the same foods. They tend to have the same stressors. So that's a big reason that people maybe get breast cancer in a family. Maybe they all were exposed to a similar toxin at some point. It can be symptoms, I think, as simple as that. But then, maybe the endobiont got upregulated in a certain way. They've shown also too, when a sperm and an egg meet, that there's light and energy that is emitted off. There's a lot of energy. I mean, imagine for just a second, that you had a man and a woman that came together for the intention of procreation, and that the man before that time made sure that he didn't spill a seed just everywhere. He just retained it. He practiced building up the Croesus oil. He came together with a woman for the intention of procreation. They both had worked on their health beforehand, and they created this spark of life. And think about how much energy would be available to that child in their life. Um, and then let's take it a step further with astrology, right? Imagine if you planned out when they were going to be born based on, maybe you meditated and thought, well, kind of feels like my child's supposed to be a Taurus. And you thought about that. And then you figured out 9 months later, this would be a Taurus. And then you came together at that time. I mean, that'd be a pretty amazing child that was born. And I think a large amount of people that are born, unfortunately, that spark of life at conception sometimes lacks that energy. And so we have this lowered vital force that TCM and Ayurveda and all these other, like you said, healing modalities of antiquity have talked about. They've talked about prana and chi and life force. They had ways to test that kind of stuff. And I think it has to do with that conception. So those are the factors. And I mean, even if we wanted to get into electrical potential that's in people, right? They pick that up with tuning forks all the time.
Yep.
We have this electricity that also influences what's expressed in the body. So again, these are just my ideas of why people maybe, like if they have their BRCA genes tested for cancer, why do
Yep.
things sometimes work, not work? And maybe as a alternative to doing those testings, what might actually be a other um, modality?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, because this is something I'm hearing about. What you're talking about, BRCA. There's a couple of things I really want to dig into what you just said there, but the so-called BRCA gene, which is made famous back in something like 2013. Angelina Jolie, who's like the quintessential booby model, undergoes elective amputation or mastectomy based on this genetic, which is, if we're getting down to genetic, we're talking about something that is shaky on its foundation, and if anything, pseudoscientific and falsifiable. A recommendation that if she kept her her boobs, that her breast, her lymphatic tissue, the symbol of nurture, for a woman,
Yeah.
the protection of a heart, all this stuff, right? That she would, prevent 89% chance of cancer. And then now we're looking at statistics too. And it's like 89%. What does that mean? Does that mean 89% more than the average person? Or does that mean, statistics are even, are even kind of like sleight of hand when they're presented that way too.
Yeah.
And so since then, more and more women are getting tested. And, if you're a hammer, you're going to, everything's a nail. And if you're a surgeon, maybe everything's going to cut. I don't know. I don't want to sound that way, but it seems like the industry is set up that way where they say, you know what? I see on your health history here that your mother had breast cancer. Looks like you mentioned that your sister had breast cancer. Let's go ahead and run this test and see if it comes back as a positive gene. And when it does, then, oh, look, well, that was painful. What you went through, right? All these things were painful. And so you mentioned cancer, working with people with cancer. And I guess I'm just interested in why, from a terrain perspective, do you see cancer? Like some of these other reasons why. And I guess one of the biggest leverages that people have, or that's used against them from the medical perspective, is the fear of cancer, the fear of pain and suffering from everything that's going through. And what is there available to dispel some of that spell?
Yeah. I mean, this is partly when, we started this conversation. I said it's really important to get on the same level as whoever you're consulting with, because let's say someone in a white coat tells you that you're going to die on this date or that you have 2 months to live. That's a pretty scary thing, especially if you respect that person, and it almost kind of writes your path for you. And when we get these statistics, I mean, how do they know? They don't know what you're doing every day. They don't know what your destiny is supposed to be. So really, to me, that's what malpractice, the definition of malpractice should be. But, you know, these influential factors on the psyche, I think, are a large part of why people do get ill. If you have a belief system that tells you you're going to get ill and you're going to have these things because your mom and your sister had these things, that's also a really big factor to consider. So I think a large part of it is, yeah, breaking the spell, realizing and reading these things and educating yourself so that you have an other idea about why you might be facing the symptoms that you're facing. And the other thing is it gives power back to you, right? If you understand that what you eat and what you put in your body and your thoughts and beliefs and the water that's within you can shape and influence those outcomes, that gives you the choice about what you want to do about it, rather than that you have this set genetic code that you're just kind of screwed. I'm sorry, right? And you should go ahead and just amputate yourself and cut things off. I mean, I think we're going to look back on this time and be like, wow, that was pretty barbaric, right? Um, and even if we look at how cancer progresses, a lot of times we have, if you take more of like a German new medicine approach to this, we have things that go to the lungs, and that's like a fright conflict for a lot of people. They have this fear, and then that's why it, grows and metastasizes to that area. Similarly, if it invades the lymphatic system, to me, this is just my perspective again. If somebody moves to the lymph where previously it was in the center and it was a solid mass, it now gets the lymph where it can be removed. I think that can be sometimes a positive thing. And if we move the lymph in a intelligent way, we could be taking out the trash essentially. But again, they'll tell you, oh, we're spreading cancer and moving things around. These are just different ideas, right? I don't think that I have the end all be all on this, but I think when I think about why do people get cancer, it's their body has an assault, whether that's emotional or toxicological, that they're hardening off and separating from their body, and the body's trying to protect the rest of the organism from that.
Yeah, that's the emotional, psychological component that you mentioned is really not discussed a lot in the context of cancer. The traumatic experiences that people have that are, hardened up, so to speak.
Yeah.
Having our spiritual, our emotional, and mental condensate into a physical form. Gosh, there was something that you mentioned there that I really wanted to get into. You mentioned electrical potential.
Yeah.
You mentioned working with tuning forks. That's something that I do. Actually, I'm a biofield practitioner as well. So I have adapted a biofield. Well, I'm a self-taught biofield practitioner, but I've adapted this method with tuning forks and herbs.
That's very cool. I mean, I think that has a large part of why, our organs are the way they are, right? That frequency that comes off of them. So that's very cool, Kyle.
Yeah, it is. It's true. Yeah, this is where the doctrine of signatures comes in. I'm just looking at this book right here that's right next to me. I might as well pull it out. This is The Language of Plants. It's a really great, it's from the Steiner Press. It's a really great book on doctrine of signatures. And that's kind of my jam when it comes to learning about plants and learning about organ specificity through the plants, is that, as you're aware, this is for the audience, but nature doesn't waste a shape. It creates shapes in the same way that a cymatic pattern is created. It's frequencies coming together, and boom, you have this cymatic pattern, and looks like 3 lobes, so we'll call it hepatica. Looks like 3 lobes, so we'll call it the liver, and so on. Gosh, there was something that you were mentioning, your cancer thing that I wish I would have taken a note of, but that's all right. I just want to say that I figured it out. I remember now. You were discussing. I was just reading yesterday an article by your mentor, who you brought up, Dr. Kenneth Profrock, and the article was about placebo, nocebo, and so here you're discussing the potential of what is the offer. Okay, here's the offer. The offer is on the table. We don't always realize that we're given a pen to just sign an offer, look at the details and go through ourselves. We're kind of just like, here, sign this now, sign this now. If you go to the hospital and you have the doctor with a white coat, and Dr. Tom Cowan calls it like waving a wand. But if we bring it back to an offer, I'm like, I'm going to give myself some space to consider your offer, and maybe I'll counter offer. I really like the way that this realm is set up, that we can make counter offers. We can accept an offer with the condition. Yes, I accept that you see this as cancer and that you're going to give me 2 months to live on the condition that I go through your treatment.
Yeah.
But I counter offer that if I go through a different treatment, I have a different outcome that's written by God only. So one of the things that Dr. Profak was talking about in this article is that the placebo, which is, taking something that we think is, a cancer causing or a cancer eliminating drug, for example, and we get better because our mind is so powerful. And nocebo is the example of the doctor saying, if you don't, amputate this part of your body, you're going to get cancer.
Yeah.
It's that accepting that offer. And placebo is inert. It doesn't do anything. That's the point. It doesn't do anything. So having a different word for this phenomena is important. And that's kind of what you've just been discussing this whole time. And what Dr. Profak proposes is, instead of the placebo effect, it is the meaning effect, the meaningful effect of, and as a practitioner, as a functional medicine practitioner, looking at all the meaning, bringing up all of the spiritual, the emotional, where is it? How is this resonating to you in your family history? Is this scary? Is this something that you feel comfortable going through? What other support that we have is so much more intentional and so much more powerful to the person, the meaning aspect. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, it all comes back almost to like contract law, right?
Yeah.
If you sign up for an iPhone, you contract to have them ping your phone to different phones and track your location and track what you're doing so they can make ads for you. If you contract to have the hospital take you in and they can do certain procedures that maybe are something that you don't want to do, it's all contract law, and you got to know what you're signing up for. And yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, placebo, nocebo, all these things are important things to consider. I mean, I've had patients who do really well if they've had surgery or chemo or radiation. And I think about that too. I might not agree with it, but there might be a time when that was appropriate and they believed in it and that's what they wanted to do. And maybe it's actually not good for me to be like, stop doing that. You're going to poison your body. Obviously, I give them my perspective and I explain these things to them, but I let them make their choice, because at the end of the day, again, right? Like, I'm not in charge of their health. That's going to be their own unique path. I just offer it, and they can take it or leave it. And either way, like, I care about the people I work with, but I've had to work a lot on like letting that go, because for a long time, like, it did eat me up. I still do. I care whether they feel better or not, but it's been a continuing practice for me to be like, they're going to live their life. And if they're going to choose that path, maybe there's something I don't know, and just be okay with that. Again, that's where faith comes in.
Yep, absolutely.
But then, if we look at placebo, there's nothing wrong with placebo. If you give something to someone and they feel like it actually makes a difference, who am I to take that away from them, right? And all the time, people are like, well, what protein powder should I take? And I'm like, I don't really like that protein powder. I'd probably do this instead. They're like, but it's what helps me keep my diet. Like, I'm able to fast this whole time with that. And that's what they have, that idea, they have that paradigm. But if I take that away, then they struggle and they don't enjoy it. And then the whole thing falls apart, right? In the grand scheme of things, is that one protein powder going to really make or break every little thing? Probably not. So I think that's the other thing. When you're working with someone, just recognize who they are, their behaviors, what's their emotions, and take that into account.
Yeah, the belief system. It's there reaches a point when an examination of belief systems that I feel like becomes circular for me, which is there's only one belief system, and it's that which makes the cymatic patterns that turns the leaf into its shape, So it governs the form and the function of everything. And the same can be said about how we've psychologized the belief as well.
Well, Kyle, I mean, that makes more sense to me about, I don't believe plants come into existence because creators like, oh yeah, we need a BRCA2 plant or we need an IGF plant, right? I think we have these plants that are support systems for us. And if we prepare them intentionally, they can do some pretty amazing things.
What do you think about that in terms of the landscape then, the terrain itself, the so-called invasive plants or the weeds that come in? You got something to say about that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the idea of like bioregional herbalism is really intriguing, right? That the weeds that are in your backyard might be actually the thing that you need. Um, I think it's worth always, rather than sometimes shipping like ashwagandha from overseas, what might be another plant that's in your area that could maybe play a similar role in your life? And so, yeah, I think that's also just getting to know your community. And so I encourage people, go outside and get to know, just like you get to know the neighbors down the street, get to know the plants that are in your backyard, and see what they can do for you.
Yeah, that's right. And getting to know the neighbors down the street, you also get to know, which plants you might want to pick too, because you see the little signs that say, hey, no dogs allowed. Also might be thinking,
Yeah.
all right, well, I'll stay away from picking their dandelions too.
Yeah. Yep.
Gosh, there's so many things I want to get to. I know that you're doing some live blood analysis in your clinic too. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That can you tell us a little bit about that? I just want to hear you geek out about that because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
What is that process like? Where did you learn it?
Yeah, I did. Well, first, I just read books. That's kind of how I start with a lot of this stuff. I hear a podcast or someone talks to me. I have friends that are in the same realm and we'll talk and I'll say, oh, I should go read more about that. So I'll start reading on it. And then with live blood, I ended up doing some training with Biomedics is the company that's here in the US. And then Health House in Canada was the other organization that I did some training with. But then just read a lot of like Enderlein's texts, for example. Got some books basically on just basic like morphology of blood and red blood cells and how they take form. And yeah, started playing around with taking people's blood. And so generally what people do is they come in fasting. That's usually best. No caffeine, no food that morning. And they sit down, we go through a general assessment. I take their blood pressure, ask them a couple questions, see how they're feeling. They tell me more about their story, what's been going on. And then I get just one drop of blood and I put it up on the microscope. And when you're doing live blood, I want to just start with this because there's lots of different viewpoints nowadays in live blood. And I don't like to hang my hat on one thing, right? Live blood to me is a great assessment technique. It's just like if I ordered any other labs. There's variables that we have to consider, right? And I guarantee you now, based on podcasts I listen to and a lot of the people that are becoming very popular in the live blood field, that if I put all of them in the same room and put the same slide up, they all would have different answers to the same thing, which creates a problem nowadays. So when you do live blood, you have to be careful about how you interpret it, right? Again, I'm going to try to not be like, well, this is this thing on this slide. Like I'm seeing lots of fibrin, so I know that you have sticky blood and I know that you have this toxicity. I don't know that for sure. It's an idea. So we just start by exploring what's the general theme of the blood, right? Do I continue to see that theme throughout? Do I see other factors like lots of red blood cells that stack on top of each other that might inform me of these factors? The other thing is that, depending on where you're at in the slide, like if you're on the edges of the slide, you could make someone's blood look really bad. And you could say, hey, as a practitioner, you need all my services. Whereas if you're in the middle of the slide after you've seen them for 3 weeks, you could say, hey, wow, your blood looks a lot better. So I'm starting with this because I like people to be informed about who they're working with. When you see someone for live blood, you want to make sure you look at the whole entire slide. You want to take a holistic approach, meaning that I'm not trying to force my opinion or put an idea into their head about why they have the symptoms that they have until after we've had our discussion. And that I'm not taking my own personal bias, meaning taking objective images and then making my own impressions come about because of that. So it's a tricky field doing live blood. I think it's a cool representation of the living blood and the terrain in real time. And people are often like, wow, I've never considered that one drop of blood has this much to it, right? They see their white blood cells moving around, they see the red blood cells moving around, and they're amazed by it. I think that's the real value in live blood, is that you get to see in front of you this small little portion of what makes up your whole entire body.
Wow. Yeah, amazing. And uh that's it's an interesting subject right now for me, because we're in the Aquarius season, which kind of rules circulation and has an impact with the blood. And so all these things are coming up for me about, the movement of blood, the fourth phase of water, Gerald Pollack's work, and so on and so on, and also the electrical potential, so-called the zeta potential within the blood, which
Yeah.
allows the blood cells to, it's like, two polar magnets that repel each other that create the circulation. You mentioned fasting, and I wonder if that is, I'm thinking about fasting because I had just been fasting for a few days. I know in the scriptures I read that it said, don't tell people that. Don't put dirt on your face and say I've been fasting. But I say that because in the Bible in particular, in the book of Matthew, chapter 17, if you go in there and you look from verse 20 and you look for verse 21, you don't see it in there. They took it out. What's up with that? Why? What does it say? Well, it turns out that it says, if you want to get, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, if you want to get rid of disease, then here's the two things that you do. One, you pray. Two, you fast. Whoa, we can't have this guy be saying that. All right, we'll give you everything else in the Bible. Just take that one out for us.
Yeah.
Well, look at your Bible, Matthew chapter 17, verse 20 and 22. You won't see 21. So it's fast and prayer. And so I say that because it's incredibly powerful as a healing tool, but it's different for everyone. It's different for everyone. It's different for all different times of the year, all different times of life. And it has different impacts on your health depending on your where you are in your health. Somebody who's really, really depleted might have a really difficult time fasting. Jesus going out in the desert for 40 days sounds like something that would kill a lot of people today, right? So where are you with fasting in your practice? Is this something that you recommend to clients as well, and guide them on? Is there recommendations and resources that you have that you can give our audience as well for learning about fasting?
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I mean, I'm not, I've read parts of the Bible. I'm actually working through the Bible right now, reading parts of it, because I'm actually wanting to read other books that kind of correlate. So I wanted to kind of have a background because I actually never sat down and read the Bible before. So I thought it'd be an interesting kind of approach this year to do that before I kind of dug into these other texts. But I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and he was talking about I believe it's the book of the Essenes. I could be wrong on this. But he was talking about how there's a passage in there that talks about how basically it outlines a dietary therapy and also what you call enemas, basically. And it talks about having the water be put into the body until it runs clean, and also fasting being another part of that. So I think we have these long traditions of people using fasting and water that was probably pretty clean as a therapeutic model to heal the body. And I think if you look at fasting, they supposedly say you can get your own stem cell productions without having to go do sketchy injections down in South America. Um, I don't know about all that, but I would say that I think what fasting does is it largely gives the body a break from the bombardment of always having to process food. It gives the body a chance to go internal, that you then can be reflective, maybe in the sense of prayer also. You can take that time to, because, usually when you fast, there probably will come a point where you feel a little tired, right? I think initially people feel pretty energized, actually, like, wow, I'm not eating, I feel good. And then there probably will come a hard part where it's, introspective. They sometimes have, I had a friend that actually did do a 40-day fast, which was pretty amazing hearing that story from him.
Wow.
And he had points where like he had these pretty profound meditations. And I think there's times where, yeah, we need to quiet and go internal and pray and feel that energy. And if you're not putting all this food, sometimes, yeah, it's good to kind of just rest. And so when I have patients, I don't tell them to go do a 40-day fast right off the bat like that. I don't think that's right for everyone. But we just start talking about like, yeah, is there a time when you can maybe go like 16 hours, for example, where you don't eat? Can we do some intermittent fasting? We play around with that. And then if they do well, maybe we start talking about like 1 to 3 days. Like, how do you feel if we do like some structured water and you take a little bit of break and you set prayers and you put really good things, or maybe even just juice fasting, getting some really high concentrated greens in you. Um, I leave it up to the person and how they feel because there's lots of variables that can influence how they feel on that fast. But I think that is a great way. I think fasting is a great way to kind of turn down the noise of the external world so you can go in and heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely feel that way too, is from a spiritual perspective, but also from the physical perspective as well. Well, I I know that we're past an hour here, but I want to get, if you have time, just one of the things I wanted to mention is that when you were talking with Mason, you were talking about how your time at Good Medicine Confluence last year. And I went previously 2 years ago. I was out in Durango and I had a blast. And I'm not a herb conference kind of herbalist guy, or at least I hadn't been prior to this, because I always thought herb conferences are for like, people who want to get famous or they're in the limelight. And so it didn't really appeal to somebody like me who who just wanted the recognition and just to talk about subjects that I've rehashed over and over and over. But then on the Good Medicine Confluence application page, it says, if you have presentations that are a little bit too far out or a little bit too eclectic or too weird for any other conference, propose them to us because this is the place. And I totally felt so welcomed and at home. And so I loved being there. And then previous year, when you were mentioning that you were there, we had a baby earlier in the year, and I was just like, I don't know. They changed the venue, and everything that seemed like just a little shifty for me, I just kind of canceled it, even though it came up later that year, and I was like, oh, I totally could have gone. And so when you mentioned that you were doing it, I was like, I got to write to Jesse Wolf Harden again, and I got to get on this year. And so I'm going to be there this year. Are you going to be there this year?
I will. Yeah, I'll see you there then.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome. So excited because this is going to be, let's do a little plug for it. It's going to be in Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. And I'm not familiar with this venue. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about it. And I'm really interested in hearing about the presentations that you're going to do, because for my part, and I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but I think it kind of is that you think about the presentations that you're going to do for something that's going to come up in October, and then you spend the whole year kind of like grabbing little bits of research, and it's just like kind of like in your field, the research for this one little presentation. And it's so fun because it's informative of all these different ways that can take your career, instead of just presenting about something that you already had in your back pocket. That's what, at least for the Good Medicine Confluence in this way. So what is it that you're going to be talking about? And I ask that as like as a question of what is it that you're interested in currently?
Yeah. It's funny you say that because like every morning I usually get up and I read, and then I feel like I go to my computer when I'm done, and the slideshows that I teach at conferences throughout the year, I just add to them slowly. And it's kind of fun. So like this morning I was reading some Walter Russell, right? And he's talking about kind of what I talk about, electrical potential and the polarity and the depolarity and how things come into material form. And so I was thinking about that in relationship to, how I was going to explain genes this year at Good Medicine Confluence. So the topics I sent to Wolf were on basically understanding why you get ill. The other one was holistic support for cancer. And then I was going to talk a little bit on the parallels between phytoconstituents in plants. Are those actually what make plants medicinal? Or is it more of this like spirit within, and then this maybe middle ground of maybe it's a little bit of both, right? And so those are the three classes I'm going to be speaking on at Good Medicine this year. And yeah, it's going to be at Ghost Ranch, which is close to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it's a great venue. It's really gorgeous if you've not been out there. You can see all the stars in the sky when you're out there at night. And it's a great place. It's kind of away from all the hustle and bustle. And I agree. A lot of the people that end up speaking there are talking about things that when I've gone to bigger herb conferences, they're great. You hear about, why is ashwagandha the greatest plant ever at some of those other conferences, but then you'll go to this and you'll be hearing about astronauts and more like just people that use plant medicine and people that are talking about more of the esoteric uses of plants and just some cool stuff that you would not see just anywhere else. And it's just a really cool community. So I really do appreciate Wolf and what he does and a lot of the presenters that were there. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there, brother. It'll be a lot of fun to be able to, yeah, catch up with you there. And I think actually I just saw too, I think you're going to be in Missouri at a conference that I'm thinking about going to here in a
Dude,
little bit.
yeah, we can plug that. That would be great. Yeah. I'd
Yeah.
really love to hook you up with my good friend Topher Gardner, who was a previous guest on this.
Yeah.
I think that you guys would really get along a lot, and I think that you would have a really great conversation. But that's going to be great. It's the Elementals Conference in Missouri. There's going to be superstars of the topic of the day, like Dr. Andrew Kaufman and Eileen McCusick and so on. And yours truly, I'll be presenting there too, and it would be awesome if you came there too. I'm gonna be bringing my family to both events, which will be really fun.
Nice.
And take away some of the tension of being away from my family, and it'll just be fun to have like a business write-off vacation.
Yeah. No, man, it sounded like a great event, and I think I saw that you were going to be there. I think they mentioned your name. I was like, oh man, I got to get out there because Missouri's not too far of a drive from here. It's doable, and so I was like, oh man, it'd be great to get a group of friends and head on out. So hopefully we'll see you there this year.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I know there's going to be some other people from Indianapolis coming too. So it's great, and you can camp there. It's fun. I'll be doing an herb walk. I'll be talking. My topic will be on ether. And that's the element. And so I'll be talking a lot about, the belief system and the cosmic forces that govern the patient deciding to even come to an herbalist, even to pick up the phone. I feel like all of this is kind of, part of if you were to put an element to it, that's the etheric element, the way that somebody could stand in front of a wall of tinctures and then pull one off as if they're pulling out a tarot card and be like, what is skullcap? And then you could just shotgun off a bunch of things that, skullcap does, quote unquote, or how it's been traditionally, regarded. And people are just like, check, 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 check. Oh my gosh. I feel like so powerful by pulling off the one that I just needed, Yeah. All of that is part of that connection, that etheric connection that exists between us, the natural world, the way that we see our health, and a couple things that I didn't get in with you, but I would love to have you back for another discussion, maybe after the Good Medicine Confluence, and we could talk about some of your subjects too. But your work with the Weston A. Price Foundation, and you're doing a chapter down there in Indianapolis, and some other things too. But as we're coming to a close, maybe you can just give the people all of the ways that they could find you, they could book with you, some of the other things that you do in your work, in your life, besides the herbal stuff, like I said, the Weston A. Price, to give ways people to connect with you, and take it away.
Yeah. If people want to search Hartwood Herbals, it's spelled HARTWOOD, Hartwood Herbals. You can find my website that way. It's the same thing on Instagram, Hartwood Herbals. And you can visit the website. You can schedule personal in-person consultations or virtual consultations with me that way. I also do, if people want to book live blood audits that way too, they can do that. I have some of the offerings, like some of the products that I make, whether that's tinctures or liposomal preparations or various different things. They can contact me and inquire about ordering those products. And they can also see some of the other podcasts or references or other ways to kind of learn a little bit more. If they're interested in maybe working with me or want to learn a bit more about, what I do, they can check out the website and kind of find some more of those resources. If you are in Indianapolis, we do have a chapter, a Weston Price chapter here. We just actually met the other day. We had a meeting on sovereign technology. We're talking about all the ways that you can use technology and not be spied on all the time. So we have some really good teachers come and just have some good, intimate gatherings that are kind of focused on what are some actionable ways that you can kind of take back your life and be more sovereign. Um, so if people want to also get more information on that, they can reach out to me and they can attend a chapter meeting. And then when I'm not with patients or not with the plants and making medicine, actually right now I'm actually taking up the mantle of trying to learn more like manual osteopathic modalities. So that's been a big interest of mine. So I've been reading a lot of books on manual therapy currently and doing some training with that in my evenings. But also I've played tennis since I was very young, and I still coach a little bit here and there. And so I like to still coach. So I do that some nights a week. I'll coach the youth in the area, and it's fun. It gets me active and gets me kind of in a different frame of mind. So I've enjoyed athletics for quite a bit. But yeah, hiking and traveling and having these kind of conversations are what I usually do. Besides that,
That's great. Yeah. What a breath of fresh air with all these pickleballers all over the littering all over the court. I'm just kidding.
the fastest growing sport
Yeah,
apparently.
it's great that people are out, then they're doing things, and I think it's great. But really, a breath of fresh air because of from a young man like yourself, if you don't mind me saying so, uh, with a bright career ahead of you, and the type of way that you engage in your self-reflection for the services that you provide others is so beautiful to know that there is mentorship that you're offering in some of the various ways that you're doing, but also this is kind of like where it's going on the horizon. So I really appreciate you, Aron. Thank you so much. We'll have all of your links and everything like that in the show notes too, for all the people to check out. And next time I'm in Indianapolis, I'm gonna send you a message, and let's get together.
Yeah, man, definitely, Kyle. I appreciate you having me on today. And yeah, same to you. I mean, it's amazing the work that you're doing with your teachings and also what you're doing with herbalism and yeah, just your different approach to supporting others. So I really admire you, man. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show. And yeah, we're definitely going to hang out in Missouri, New Mexico, and then hopefully in our respective states.
Feeling is mutual. All right. Well,
Yeah,
thanks, Aron.
cool. Thanks, man.